started to think about what content would be relevant to the time we're living in right now, I thought it would be quite helpful to talk about what is it like to succeed in a remote product role, given that a lot of things have changed from what we knew before. So a little bit about me. As Tim mentioned, I'm currently the VP of Product at Electric, I think for about 8 months now, probably feels like 3 years in startup years, but been really great. And I'll talk a little bit about what it was like starting there. Prior to Electric, I was the VP of Product at General Assembly for our software products that served both our B2C and B2B businesses. And then before that, led product teams at WW and the College Board. In my personal life, I have 2 young kids, which now are part of my professional life as well, and love all things fitness, from CrossFit to yoga to hiking, and miss all the traveling that we did do, but am exploring a lot of local treasures lately, given our limitations. So before I get started, I wanted to talk about what my life was like before COVID. So this was my daily routine: get up with my kids, feed them breakfast, drop them at school, get on beloved New Jersey Transit, head into the office, spend a day there, and then on the way home, sort of in reverse, although I fit in a workout after getting off the train, come home, get my kids settled, usually log back onto work. Very linear, very expected, routine, sort of on autopilot, been doing it for 10, 15 years. It's kind of like, you're just going through the motions at that point in time. So back in March, this completely uprooted what I knew for basically my entire professional career. And I had to reimagine how I had to approach basically my entire life, not just professional, but personal as well. So, I eliminated pretty much all of these things and was left with kids, work, all in the same place. And now what, right? And so I think the reason I'm telling you this is because I think it's relevant to how we're approaching our product jobs now, and that our environments have changed, but our goals and what we have to get accomplished are still the same. So starting a new product role, it's scary, super anxiety inducing. You've got a new company, probably a new industry, new product you have to get up to speed on, new strategy, new customers. Probably the most anxiety inducing is a new manager, right? What are his or her expectations? How do you make sure that you are meeting them? And so when I started at Electric back in December, obviously this was pre-COVID, but for me, it was the first time I was reporting to a CEO. I knew absolutely nothing about IT, I'll be honest with you. It's the earliest stage startup I've ever joined. So Series B company, Series B problems, something that was new to me. And obviously brand new product, totally different set of customers I'd never interacted with. And so it was really just, thinking about how I could think through getting comfortable with those things. And I'll talk about sort of a strategy and tactics that you can take. But also, as I was thinking about chatting with you all, I surveyed a lot of my new hires that have started between March and now. I think we had about 5 or 6 folks who have started with the team. And not surprisingly, right, as a product manager, the most important things for them to feel confident about in their roles as they started a new role was understanding the users, how they use the product, their pain points, of course, how the business works, right? What's important, how are we doing? Getting familiar with the product vision, the roadmap, the history, what decisions have we made and why, and how do we start to think about the future, and how to develop relationships with other people across the organization, not just within your product and engineering squads, but also cross-functional stakeholders. We know that our jobs as PMs is really that glue that brings everything together. So as we evolved into this temporary and now more permanent, semi-permanent remote work lifestyle, a lot has changed, right? And the challenging aspect is that everything we knew as far as how we recruit, how we hire, how we onboard, how we learn, how we work, it was very heavily reliant on face-to-face interaction unless your company was already set up in either 100% remote or a hybrid model. For most companies, this was an extremely new thing to tackle. But the good news is for those companies and those individuals who are able to adapt quickly and learn from this, I honestly think that those are the companies and the folks that are going to thrive in the future, and that this sort of remote or hybrid model is here to stay. So when you think about what starting at a new company looked like, right, or still looks like, you are coming into a company usually on your first day. In the startup world, you might have an onboarding buddy, which is lovely. They meet you for breakfast or coffee. They walk you around the office. You kind of get your hardware and you start setting up your accounts. You might have a team lunch or a lunch with your manager. Probably have a lot of reading to do, documentation, getting up to speed on other decks. And so there's a lot to really kind of pretty much do in a very physical setting. And so all of this has now transitioned to a remote setting, right? And basically the arrow points to Zoom for it all, right? So you might have a remote coffee now on Zoom. There's no longer an office tour. You might be leveraging org structures or HRIS systems to get an understanding of the organization and who's who. You, instead of attending maybe sales stand-ups on Monday morning or other company meetings, dropping into their meetings, shadowing how others work looks a lot different these days. And so we've really had to rethink how we get up to speed on the things that we need to do or to know to do our jobs. And when you think about just general onboarding, right, the principles, they're the same. Usually you're defining, or your manager has worked with you to define what your 30, 60, and 90-day goals are. There's a lot of kind of sponge-like activities where you're really listening, learning, probably have to listen to things several times. I know I did in the first couple months at Electric's, very complex business, and it takes a lot of time to sort of really understand the concepts. You're working on building relationships, right? As PMs, we not only have to understand our customers, be able to navigate the inner workings of an organization to get things done. And then once you've sort of collated all of that together, you start to really form points of view and action those recommendations. So none of this has changed, but our approach needs to, right? So as I talked about, when you onboard into a team, a company, other teams, everything needs to shift for us to be able to do our jobs. And what I think is that these two sort of key themes are important, right? Intentionality and asynchronous work are really going to be the key to strong remote collaboration. And I'll talk about what I mean by both. So what do I mean by intentionality? To make this a little bit more interactive, I'd love if you could put a +1 in the chat if you ever gotten to the end of your day and you haven't even had a chance to start your work. I know as a PM, your time can pretty much immediately vanish. You're in back-to-back meetings, you're in customer calls, you're in agile ceremonies, you are switching back and forth between lots of different things. And it's really hard to sort of stay, yeah, +1 times 10, love it. And so because of that, in this new setting, it's almost like we've lost more time. And it's more important than ever to manage that time and how you approach your work. So this is not only critical as you onboard into a new role, given the learning ramp, but as well as staying in that role and continuing to kind of thrive. Similarly, I think we forget that others are just as busy as us. And as I mentioned, our jobs are very cross-functional. So how we work and what we need from others is also something we need to take into consideration. And frankly, gone are the days where you could literally just swivel around your chair, right? Walk over to someone's desk, ask a quick question. And so we've had to sort of replace that with different ways of working. So what do I mean by asynchronous work? This term I know and love from my time at GA, but for those with kids, we know a lot about these terms because we're talking a lot about synchronous, asynchronous learning, what it's going to look like in September. But what I mean by this for our work is that while collaboration is absolutely necessary, it's not required to be 100% synchronous all the time. Our default is constantly to schedule a meeting, right? How many of you walked away from a meeting and wondered, what was the purpose of that meeting? Did we even get what we needed? Could it have been shorter? Could it have just been an email? I almost think that we've become we've gone to the other end of the spectrum where we're even more inefficient, and we've swung so far onto the synchronous collaboration deep end that there's just opportunity there to balance what's required and how we can leverage the best of both worlds. And the truth is we have these amazing tools at our disposal, but we tend to over-index to some more than others. So these three focus areas, right? Not new. You're like, great, Tara, I've heard these before. Just like I mentioned earlier, none of this is new in what we need to do. It's how we approach it that needs to change. So I'll walk through a couple of examples of ways you can approach organization, communication, and collaboration. So as PMs, right, we often need to navigate between the strategic and the tactical, right? What is your product vision? What are the broader problems we need to solve for our customers, to then diving into a product requirements document or writing user stories and acceptance criteria. And in between all of that, you're context switching with meetings, managing stakeholders, interviewing customers, managing squads. And in this remote setting, as I mentioned, our time has just somehow disappeared. We're in back-to-back Zooms. And in order to get back into control, you really need to manage your time and your calendar like very, very, very specifically and efficiently. So this also means setting boundaries with others, not just your teammates, but with cross-functional folks. And so I urge you to think about, when are you most productive, right? For me, it's going to be either early mornings, quiet time, or later in the afternoon. When do you do your most thoughtful work, and how can you marry that to some of the needs that you need to do in your job? When do you feel like you are most on, right? So if you have to lead workshops, brainstorms, user interviews, how can you tailor those times to when you do your best work? And also think about grouping your meetings, right? By the type of brain power that is required. If you are doing one-on-ones, right? Can you just stack them up in a given block to make sure you're not context switching between a one-on-one, a brainstorm workshop, and then maybe like, I don't know, a stand-up, right? And for heads down time, I've made this mistake in the past where it's not enough just to say, hey, for these 2.5 hours, I'm going to do strategic work. It's really important to define goals for that time and also not to overcommit. So I would almost encourage you to think about this like your own velocity and make it achievable so that you feel accomplished in that time frame, and that I'm going to get just this. If I get this one thing done, I will be happy, versus saying I'm going to dedicate these 3 hours and where's my laundry to-do list. And so it'll just never end. You'll never feel like it was accomplished. The next one is not foreign to us, right? As PMs, we're constantly talking about KPIs, success metrics, but have you ever considered about setting them for yourself, for the work that you need to do and for things that potentially always get dropped to the wayside? One example is if our jobs are to understand our user and what their pain points are, how might you set goals around potentially the number of customer interactions you have? On my team, we have standing weekly agenda items to share key takeaways from previous interactions the week prior. Additionally, right, if our jobs are to understand the business and how it works, how can you seek out that information? I guarantee you that any person in finance is more than happy to sit down and walk through the company P&L and answer your questions. They often don't even get the opportunity to do this very often. And every time that I've asked someone to do this, they just light up and they're more than happy. So it's really just seeking out and thinking through, what do I want to learn? What do I need to do to learn to do my job? And figure out how to tie that to a goal. Another area that we've identified just through happenstance and just trial and error is consider defining or proposing an onboarding project if you're in a new role, or as a hiring manager, defining something very succinct and with clear parameters and a deadline that allows someone new to both quickly ramp into their role as well as meet new people within that time frame across the organization that may be a little bit more challenging in a remote setting. So for example, for some of our new hires, we've defined these projects that maybe they're a couple of weeks long, they have very clear deliverables, and it requires them to really work cross-functionally to gain the knowledge to complete that. And so you sort of hit on a couple of key things that we need to do as PMs, all within their first 30 days. So we talked a little bit about the barrage of meetings, but I'd love to know if any of you have ever felt like you're going nuts, context switching between chat, email, meetings, back and forth. There's kind of notifications coming at you from every which way, and we're constantly inundated with all of that chatter. And again, we have the blessing and the curse of technology, but we tend to use literally every mode of communication in a very haphazard way. And I think it's really important to define norms of how you and your team want to communicate. So if your team hasn't already defined this, it's a great thing to propose as a new exercise, even if it's just your pod, like you and your engineers and your designer. This doesn't need to be, tackling the org-wide norms. But I will tell you that things that start to work in small ways tend to bleed into other teams, and they will want to adopt it if they see success. So, other things to consider. It's okay to snooze your notifications, to shut down Slack, right? I think we all constantly feel like we need to be on. But again, for us to do our jobs well, we often have to think through really complex problems. We have to brainstorm some hairy solutions that require bouncing ideas off other people, considering edge cases, and that's okay to really focus that time and set expectations with others. You could also consider leveraging dedicated modes of communication or chat channels for announcements to reduce a lot of the back and forth that tends to arise as PMs. Again, being that hub, regardless if you have product marketing managers or agile scrum masters, all that good stuff, at the end of the day, we're usually that centralized place where we get the questions, right? And so being able to create more tailored comms that maybe are more one way, or give everybody more kind of pull information or other places to look for that information reduces a lot of the kind of context switching we usually need to do all day long. And then another thing I'd recommend is no meeting blocks. So this is something I stole from General Assembly that we did and brought it to Electric, where we scheduled one day a month with absolutely no meetings for product and engineering to just get things done. Whatever each person deemed most important, use that time however you wish. And as I mentioned before, when you start small and other teams see, like, that's interesting, I wish I had that, I feel burnt out, so many meetings, that will likely get adopted or want to be adopted across the organization. And I'm happy to say that we now have instituted no meeting blocks org-wide every Thursday morning, replacing our prior monthly days. And it's something that will benefit everybody in the organization now. So the other thing on communication is meeting etiquette. Frankly, I think we could all think about examples of this even in a pre-COVID world. But now that we're all on Zoom, it becomes even more interesting. And I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Agendas aren't new, right? But I think it's really important to make sure that if you think you need that synchronous time together, again, going back to questioning, should this be an email? Is this a Google Doc? Could we collaborate on it? Or do I really need that live time to chat through something? You have to make sure there's an agenda. You have to make sure that everyone understands, what do you want to get out of that time? Evaluate how much time you need, and make sure that everyone's kind of up to speed on that ahead of time. The other thing is, again, leveraging the tools that we have. There are ways that we can be a lot more inclusive now that we are in this remote setting. So Zoom has things like hand raising. You can solicit feedback ahead of time in a written way, whether it's a doc or a survey, for folks who may not feel comfortable being more vocal, maybe in a bigger meeting. And we also have the ability as PMs to read the room, right? See who has something to say, but maybe can't get a word in. So another hat we wear is facilitator, right? And how do we make sure we get the best ideas from everyone in the room and make sure that we're managing that correctly? For collaboration, I wanted to talk a little bit about the written word. It's funny because I think we err a lot away from documentation or writing things out because it seems like more work, right? When do I have time? I'm always in meetings. But at the end of the day, if we can't get our thoughts down on paper and coherently explain a point of view, a decision or approach, it kind of tells you something, right? It sort of evaluates for yourself, like, is this the right thing we should be doing? And while it seems like it's a time suck, it's actually a huge time saver, because It could also eliminate meetings, right? We all want that. And so it's a way for us to blend the asynchronous with the synchronous and align on things like key decisions, right? How do we make sure that everyone understands what's the background of what we're trying, the decision we're trying to make? What is the, what are the recommendations? What are the pros? What are the cons? Like all of that doesn't need to be read out loud. That could be put in a Google Doc, would be sent around ahead of time, and everyone could sort of collaborate within that doc itself, comment, etc. Maybe you just need a 15-minute sync and align on, what everyone thinks. Similarly, for brainstorms and workshops, it's really helpful to send a prompt ahead of time, right? Again, what do you want to get out of this workshop? What are things you should be thinking about before you enter it? It really focuses that time you have together on the goal that you really want to achieve. And I've even seen some of our teams move some of their agile ceremonies to an asynchronous format just in Slack, right? They could just type in like, what did I do yesterday? What am I blocked on? What do I need to do tomorrow? And there are now design tools that allow us to collaborate really well together, like Figma, right? To leave feedback in line. We might not need as many design reviews as we thought we did. And so it's just really important, again, to evaluate what can we do more efficiently on our own, collaborate on our own time, and then what do we need to really get together on? What requires that live conversation? Last but not least, if we don't know what our colleagues are working on, our jobs get really hard. For me, especially at Electric, it's really important for us to understand what the customer service org is doing. A lot of the product and services that we provide to our customers is dependent both on things that are happening within the CS department as well as our software product. And so if we get out of sync, it could impact not just what we're building, but also our customers if we're not aligned and somebody's doing something that is maybe redundant or totally in the wrong direction. And so as PMs, we have to understand not just who's who, but how do other teams operate? How do they make decisions? How do they strategize? How do they think about quarterly planning? When are they talking to customers? How can we make sure we're part of that? And so if you don't already have a buddy that you were given as you onboarded, it's a great opportunity to just randomly pair up with somebody across the organization or use a tool like Donut, right, to kind of learn about what somebody's role is and what they do and get more insight into how they operate and serve your customers. The other thing that is important to kind of leverage is we have amazing shared tools, calendars, right? And so it's really easy for us to get a little bit more organized around what each team is doing and how we can pop in and out of that. So for example, our sales team has their sales stand up on Mondays and then a wrap up at the end of the week. And we see that and we're more than welcome to pop in at any time and hear what's going on. Similarly, our CSMs have a shared calendar where they put all of our customer meetings on there. And it's really easy for us as PMs to understand who are we talking to and when are there quarterly business reviews, how can we pop in, or are there opportunities for us to get product feedback in the moment? And we just add ourselves to the invite and it's really easy. So it's just easy ways to sort of blend into how other teams are working without adding a lot of onerous process. The other thing that has worked well for us that I would suggest is, especially in a remote setting, we've stood up what we call summits, and they are cross-functional teams that work with product and eng to talk through potential opportunities to solve in the future. So it's helpful to hear not just real-time feedback, but themes that have been occurring over time and how that gets inputted into how we plan quarter over quarter. And then on the fun side, right, we don't want to be all business, but thinking through kind of team bonding events, making sure you're talking through weekly wins and that permeates throughout your organization is important for everyone to feel part of one team and that they're winning together. So as I mentioned before, PMs, we're the glue. We hold everything together. Any lack of knowledge in this ecosystem, it affects our product strategy, and it in turn would affect our customers in the business. We have to understand how the business operates, get up to speed on the mission, the industry, the business strategy, the P&L, how we're hitting targets against our goals. We have to get up to speed on the product vision, strategy. How does the product work itself? Where are the gaps? We have to know our customers. What are their needs? What are their pain points? And we have to know how our stakeholders work so that we can get things done. What are the processes within and outside our team? Who do we go to for what? And how do we continue to build those relationships in this new setting? And so in this new norm, we just have to be the pioneers to integrate these creative ways of working, not just for ourselves and our own success, but also for the teams and the companies that we work for. At the end of the day, product is constantly in this unique position where we have visibility into literally everything. And so it's a privileged role to be in, but it also comes with a lot of accountability. And I think, we have that opportunity to really set the standard here and show other teams and our companies, right, what good looks like in this new world. So thinking back to the story I shared with you earlier, again, my daily goals remain the same, just like our daily goals as PMs remain the same. We've just had to adapt our approaches. So, the difference is my previously linear, very known daily routine had to shift to one that was able to blend and balance both my personal and professional needs. And as I mentioned before, we have the opportunity to do the same as PMs and how we work. We just need to start somewhere. And it's okay to start small and keep iterating just like we do with our products and just see what works for, each one of you. That's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tara. We now can take questions. Instead of using the chat feature, we're going to open it up. Well, whatever you're comfortable with, if you prefer to use that. Sorry, not the chat, the Q&A feature. Pop your questions there or unmute yourself and ask the question directly.
Can I ask a question? Or are you calling on people?
Go for it, Heather.
All right, awesome. So I'm in a unique situation because I'm 2 months into a contracting product job. And so one of the challenges I'm having is a lot of the cross-functional meetings are not sort of for contractors. But I want to make the case that as a product person, I really need that context. And I'm having a lot of challenge navigating that. Any suggestions on how to position that or other concrete things to ask for other than just being invited to the large cross-functional meetings?
Yeah, great question. Are you working directly for the product org?
I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Like, who hired you as a contractor?
So I guess the product org might be the way to answer that question. I'm sort of working with I'm being loaned to a different team from the product org, I guess is the, yeah.
Gotcha, makes sense. The reason I ask, so I've seen this before where like non-employees might get excluded from specific either, email threads or forums, which makes their jobs really difficult. Especially in a product context, to your point, it's almost impossible. And the reason I asked, who hired you and sort of, what the goal of that was because I'm assuming before you were loaned out to that team, there was a reason to get a dedicated product manager or someone to help with the initiative you're working on. And I think there were likely conversations around, what was the goal you're trying to achieve and how do we get the resources to support it? And going back to whoever started those conversations, I think getting leadership buy-in to help talk to other cross-functional leaders around why, exceptions would need to be made in this case, I think would be helpful because you may not be able to, again, affect the entire company policy around what consultants are included in. But if in this case, for you to actually do your job, there would need to be some exceptions made. And I would encourage you to talk with the leader, either of your group with the leader of the one that you're kind of being loaned out to, and candidly have the conversation around what you need to do your job and why, and lay out those things very specifically, versus, I just want to be in a meeting. And how that impacts the end outcome they're looking for. So that's really going to be the crux, right? Because somebody wants something done or some impact or outcome met. And so if you can tie why you need to be in those conversations and given that context to the thing that everybody's looking for, you'll likely see a change.
Great, thank you.
I have a question kind of from a leadership perspective. I found that, like, understandably, a lot of people right now are somewhat unmotivated and have kind of a lower amount of energy in approaching their job. But obviously, as a PM, you need to get a lot of leverage and be able to utilize people on your team to do kind of what's required. So I'm wondering if there's anything you've found that's been effective in kind of like managing that energy and motivation and really just increasing it from your team.
Yeah, I love that question. Another hat we wear as PMs is a literal cheerleader, to your point. How do you motivate your team to want to do the things that are important, and why? I don't necessarily, I hear you on the morale being a little bit lower and that people maybe are feeling burnt out or not a less of a sense of connection in this setting. But at the same time, I think the reason people are excited to do things hasn't changed. At the end of the day, people want to feel like they are having impact. There's tons of research on this, right? They're not motivated by money. They're motivated by making sure that they're able to actually impact something and move the needle. And I think regardless of whether we're remote or in person, it's really important to tie back whatever work your team is doing to some, impact that's happening, whether it be a product metric or a business metric, but really creating that narrative and story for them on the what and the why, and kind of galvanizing that team around that to see how you can kind of feel very tied to it. So there's ways to do that where even, you can even make sure that it's clear why a QA engineer has to write, automation scripts and why that helps, our customers or the thing we're trying to do. It's important that each person on the team feels that mission, and that permeates not just from the kickoff or really why you're starting a feature, but all the way through the work that you're doing and then post-launch.
Great, thank you.
I've got a question. Hey, Tara.
Hi, Matt.
So as you know, but for context for other folks on the call, I'm a data scientist. So I come from a data background, and I know that PMs are frequently working with subject matter experts from often a lot of different environments. As a PM, if there's one piece of information that you really wish your subject matter experts knew so that you could both work together more effectively, do you have any insight as to what that would be?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it depends on the SME. It's funny as a data scientist, because we're doing a lot of work right now with our data scientists, and it makes me think of, in that particular scenario, I mean, you guys are all brilliant. Women, men, everybody was like in the data scientist role, just like boggles my mind. But it's a very powerful thing to do, right? To take a lot of the data that we have and either productize that or think about, ways to leverage machine learning and AI. But that could also go like Ari, right? If we're not all focused on what the problem we're trying to solve is and what our customers need, I think in that case, like being very, very focused on, the opportunity and how we iterate our way there to focus the team in kind of like segments. I think when you're talking about, I'll give you another example that's fresh in my mind, maybe a data analyst, right? And so what is the one thing that person really needs to understand? Context on the product and the users, right? I've seen analytics be completely misinformed if we're not clear on which user segment we're talking about, how they use our product. And so making sure they have what they need from the PM and the very specific details to be a partner in that scenario. Another example for engineers that I've seen work really well is a senior PM on my team actually brought in his engineers onto a customer call, and that was wildly successful because they heard the pain directly from the horse's mouth. They almost immediately started coding solutions on the call because they were so, again, coming back to that mode, how do you keep people motivated, right? Hearing that directly really starts getting their kind of mind turning. So I think it depends on what SME you're talking about and what problem you're trying to solve. But in any case, usually more context is the answer.
Cool, thank you.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Also,
or type.
Any other questions? Yes, or type. We can be inclusive here. You don't have to shout it out in front of this room.
I'll ask a question while we're waiting for, maybe it'll jog some other ones. But a recent client I worked with, they're lucky enough to be in a position where they're growing their product team right now, but the CPO still wanted to hire from a pool where eventually they'd be able to return to the office rather than the entire talent pool that's available. So like, what's your take on that? Or what would you say to that CPO who's maybe limiting the talent they could hire from because they still, from their perspective, want to be in an office working with the team?
Such a relevant question for me right now as we have discussions around, we are also growing and are incredibly blessed to continue to do that, but are evaluating, right? In a pre-COVID world, very focused on New York. And now, I'll be honest, we're expanding that, right? I think in general, I believe that the talent situation is changing, and many companies are going to be moving to other markets, remote settings. And if you don't move with that, you'll likely fall behind. So I would encourage this CPO to consider differently, because talent, one, people are now moving everywhere. And so the expectation is going to be that, you know, one, you can live everywhere, and there are going to be companies that hire you regardless of where you live. And so in order to be competitive, I do think that companies are going to have to do that.
Awesome. Thanks.
For me, I just wanted to say thank you for mentioning donut. I had no idea that existed, and I'm totally going to try to bring that to our company for doing coffee breaks and stuff to kind of interconnect.
Yeah, we actually did something. We didn't use donut at my last company. We sort of set up our own thing, but it was really nice because our product and eng org was 100 people, and it was a hybrid of in-person and remote. So you might never see someone in person, and it was the ability to just get to know them. What we also did was we gave a topic or a question of the day so that people weren't kind of awkward and like, what do we talk about other than our jobs? So it was something fun, not work related at all, just to get the conversation going. And that was super helpful.
You mentioned, I'll go for it, Iman.
Sorry, first also thank you for your time. I totally, I like the approach of having less synchronous meetings. The question is, how can you make sure that everyone are aligned, that everyone indeed, read everything, and like without seeing them actually listening to you? Do you have any recommendation for that?
Yeah, it takes time, right? To expect that everyone's going to do their homework ahead of time and come prepared to a meeting that first couple times is probably unrealistic. I would say that just continuing to create that as a behavior and an expectation and being consistent about it is going to be key. Anytime you ask people to change their behavior, I mean, I know this from my time at Weight Watchers, it's hard to do. And so I think, again, just trying and trying again, and also publicly praising people who do their homework and kind of modeling that behavior so that it, in a nice way, shames people without calling them out more directly. And then just continuing to kind of abide by that practice. And then people start to kind of take it up. I'll be honest, like I came to Electric working this way because my last company was really good about it, but it was a very new thing for my team and for this organization. Are we perfect at it? Absolutely not. Are there some teams that are better? Yes. But like there are little wins here and there. I noticed my CEO even the other day took an email thread that was getting out of control and was like, I'm just going to create a doc and let's, collaborate in there. And I was like, yes, win. So it slowly starts to happen. You just have to be consistent.
Thank you.
You mentioned 30, 60, 90-day plans. I'm curious if and how those have changed and the expectations that you set at those milestones with folks who are coming in now in a fully remote world.
Yeah, we have created this, I love Confluence. We've created like an onboarding template that we use for each new hire. And, it goes between what software you need to kind of get up to speed on, get installed on your computer, like more administrative things, to a who's who on the product team and who to go to for what, as well as stakeholders, but also a very specific 30, 60, 90 expectation, along with a checklist for your first 4 weeks, right? So it's on the hiring manager to really spell out for this person, what they need to focus on, so they're not concerned about boiling the ocean, especially in the first couple of weeks. Around, week 1 is really, playing with the product, getting demos from people, talking to stakeholders, shadowing our help desk, and just getting up to speed on how we service our customers. So it's very specific. And then after, maybe in like week 2, you start to talk about what that person's, focus is going to be in their particular role, and how that manager can help them break down, what we're trying to achieve in that time frame. Also, it's open for edits, right? So if we find that, I don't know, in week 5, that something that was a 60-day goal or 90-day goal is going to be, not feasible, then we just realign expectations around what is. And a lot of that is going to be on the part of the new employee to sort of have that collaborative discussion with their manager around what they've learned so far. Because even as I hired someone who started back in May, of course, I had aggressive goals around, I'd love for this to be done in 30 and 60, 90 days. And he's like, hey, listen, here's what I've found out. Here's my approach. Here's my strategy. And this is what I think is feasible. I'm like, great, sounds good. Like, you've done your homework. You're telling me what it's really going to take. You're in the details, not me. And so let's just realign on what we can do.
Hi, Tara. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I have a question also related to this topic. What is your one-on-one meeting cadence with your direct reports during this time? Is it still like weekly meetings, or is there anything changing? Because I guess it's more difficult for the new hire to onboard or ramp up during this time.
Yeah, great question. So the meeting cadence for my team looks like this. On Monday mornings, we get together as a full product and product design team, and we talk about topics that are relevant to that entire group, as well as our focus areas for the week. Oftentimes when someone's talking about, what they're working on, we realize there's some conversation or dependency that we need to kind of take offline during the week, or, something new that we should discuss. So it's a great opportunity for us to kind of talk as a team. As far as my one-on-ones, I have weekly one-on-ones with every direct report, ranging from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the week. And they do the same with their direct reports. I also hold monthly skip levels with those who report to my manager. So it's a way for me to stay in touch with more junior PMs or PMs on the front lines versus my leadership team, to hear, and designers too, right? To hear from them on what's working, what's not, where are their areas of opportunity. I often get my most important intel from those meetings, to be honest with you. And it's a way for me to stay in touch on things that I can help a lot of the times cross-functionally, and also ways to help coach my managers be better managers. Another thing that we do that I love in a remote setting is weekly wins at the end of the week. So from 4:30 to 5 on Fridays, we always jump on a Zoom. It's like the time to just like unwind and talk about little wins from the week, right? From, doesn't need to be a huge release. It could be, you know, small things like we finally got this thing published, or, you know, for me, it might be finally closing a new hire. Or it could just be something, you know, as tactical as like got through a difficult PRD. But it's a time for us to come together as a team and joke and be vulnerable and just make fun of each other too, and end the week on a high note. And it's sort of like this informal closing of the week, where after that, if people want to continue in their work, it's fine, but it's generally like more informal banter, if you will. So that's what our week looks like in terms of meeting cadence.
Yeah, thank you so much. On the same note, do you still keep the same meeting cadence with your mentor or sponsor? Because I guess it's also more difficult to have a coffee chat with the mentor, like what we used to do before COVID.
Yeah, great question, as I'm literally going to talk to that person on Friday. I'm incredibly lucky that I worked with my mentor for almost over a decade. And so we go way back. And yeah, I think we almost stay in touch more often between, you know, text and email, but are finally getting on a video call on Friday. So in some ways, I think it makes it more accessible. Like I've also been available to be a mentor to folks that were looking for new roles, and not necessarily even people I managed in the past, but folks who were looking for advice. It's so much easier for me to hop on a quick call or a Zoom because I've limited my commute, or I'm able to kind of squeeze it in if I'm making the kids dinner or something like that. So I actually think it's become easier, because before I'd be like looking at my schedule and seeing, where am I going to have time to physically go meet someone for coffee? Again, I'm commuting from the suburbs. My hours in the day in New York City was like very finite, and I treated it it's like precious time. So a coffee chat for me with somebody meant time and opportunity cost of time away from my team in the office, where now it's like kind of opened that up.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We have time for one more question, if anyone wants to jump in.
Sure, I have a question. I felt so validated when you said just because we have a lot of meetings doesn't necessarily mean we're like productive and collaborating. I'm currently working on kind of a newer team, and that's the general consensus is we collaborate via meetings, and oftentimes what ends up happening is we chat through a lot of context and not pie in the sky, but there's a lot of talking happening and not as much of the deliverable piece. So I'm trying to still want to make space for, you know, connecting as a team and having open dialogue, but also steer toward more functional use of time, because I look at my calendar at the end of the day and I'm like, great, but now I still have like a whole night's worth of actual like typing and work and decks to create or whatever. So just curious how I might go about kind of shifting that mindset a little bit with the team.
Yeah, you touched on a really good point, where we don't want to just be all business and be like on people, be like, all right, down business, let's get right into it. But at the same time, you're not wanting to let the more social banter go on too long, and now it's eating into what you're trying to achieve. And so I think it's balancing that. I think if you start every meeting of every day with sort of, you know, a 5 or 10 minute kind of open conversation, it's going to be inefficient. And so using your best judgment to think about, you know, if it's a Monday morning first meeting, that's usually like a pretty appropriate time to let everyone talk about maybe their weekend, what they did. I'm not sure what that is in quarantine anymore. It's usually pretty silent. But, you know, for my team, it's like, what did they cook that weekend? Just let them sort of, you know, kind of everybody get up to speed and talk about things that are not work. And I think it's okay for that to be a little bit longer at the top of the week. And then really, again, as the facilitator of that meeting, really focusing it in on, you know, where is that time you sort of interject and start to take the reins and talk through, all right, we're here today to do X, Y, and Z. I'd love to walk away with, you know, this thing or the alignment on that. It's really important to stress the goals. If somebody is deviating from that, we often, you know, fall into rabbit holes. Happens even in our exec meetings a lot. and how do you start to bring it back to what you're trying to accomplish, right? Again, we're trying to make a decision on X, Y, and Z. It sounds like we're, you know, not aligned on this. So-and-so is saying this, so-and-so is saying that. You know, how might we, you know, get there? So I think a lot of times our job is very much being that facilitator and making sure we're bringing everyone together, hearing them, but also at the same time putting a stake in the ground of, all right, we need to make a decision. You know, we need to move forward. And if the team can't do it, finding a way for you to sort of push that. Otherwise, I mean, that's why we're here, right? Teams would spin on forever and ever and ever.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the topic tonight, for the content, and for all of you for so many great questions.